Your right to speak freely is not based upon you speaking the truth. Free speech does not depend upon truth.
My name is Jeremy Prest, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to chat with our Return to Reason guest today. What if I told you that the legal ground is shifting? Sounds ominous, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly the problem that my guest today has dedicated his professional life to addressing. The executive director of an organization called RightsProbe and a distinguished professor at Queen's University School of Law, Bruce Pardy, is a classical liberal academic for whom equal application of the law, limited government, and separation of powers are foundational to the Canadian and Western legal tradition. A critic of legal progressivism and the social justice movement, he has written and spoken on a wide range of pressing topics that all intersect at the shifting center point of the culture wars. You are going to love this conversation we have today.
Today, a special episode of Return to Reason, where knowledge and wisdom intersect.
Bruce, thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation, but it is so good to have you on our show today. Welcome.
Oh, listen, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Just to give our viewers a little bit of a background, what is it you do? Why do you do what you do? And what is it that you want to share with our viewers, maybe?
Right. Well, I've been a law professor for a long time, but more recently I've taken on the task of directing a law and liberty think tank called RightsProbe, which is a division of the Energy Probe Research Foundation. And it seemed to me that a lot of people, especially during this COVID period, were encountering realities with respect to their legal system that was perplexing them, as though they thought that it worked in a way that it does not actually work. And one of the many tasks that we've taken upon for ourselves is to try and explain, how the law works and maybe how it does not work, because I think people's expectations and experiences are not meeting each other.
Well,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and in a way, if there's any silver lining to this COVID experience, it might be that things are being revealed about how our system of governance works or doesn't work, and how our legal system works or doesn't work, that people really need to understand.
Well, and I think you're actually exactly right on that because, unfortunately, so many people in the society that at least in the circle of influence that I have and know, most people just get up, go to work, get it done, get ready for the next day, and they do it again. And so that's, in my opinion, the majority of people, which is tough because when elections come up and hard-hitting issues come up, and those are the people voting. Those are the people that need to know the ins, the outs, what they value, what they don't. And when COVID hit, you said something in a speech that I was watching, and you said you don't truly know the values of something or someone until there's some pressure. And I thought that was brilliant because that's what happened. The pressure was given in our country, in a country that I would have described as loving, accepting, easygoing. There was all sorts of situations where it was completely the opposite of that. In fact, there was a story, and I'd love to hear your take on this because it was one of the most shocking things that ever happened to me. It was in the middle of it all. And I was in Manitoba, and Manitoba was very strict with all this stuff. And it was December, and it was my wife's birthday. And so I went to a store, and I won't say the name of the store. I went to the store to go just buy my wife a birthday card. And in Manitoba, the premier had outlawed anything that was non-essential. And so because it was Christmas time, they deemed Christmas cards to be acceptable. But my
Right.
wife's birthday card on the left of that was unacceptable.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
so I moved the caution tape, grabbed a birthday card for my wife, selected it, went to the counter. And the lady goes and rings it through, and then she notices that it said happy birthday. She opens it, reads it, and goes, "Sir, this is against the law." And I went, "What?" She goes, this is non-essential. And I said, "The Christmas cards are there, but the birthday card, so the ink on that card is what you're saying is against the law." And she goes, "Sorry, sir, it's just policy." And I said, "This policy is unacceptable." How did we ever get there as a nation of Canada? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the first thing that occurs to me, of course, is that through history, the number of atrocities
Yeah.
committed by people who were just doing their jobs
Oh, oh
is
yes.
is legion. Right now,
Yeah.
I'm not calling this an atrocity,
Yes,
but
yes.
still, it's ludicrous, as you will point out. It reflects. So let's try and put it to the positive. The positive part about it is that everybody can see that this doesn't make any sense, and they can see that about so many of the measures that were put in place. You know, not being able to sit down on a bench in a park alone, not allowing your kids to play on playground equipment outside, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a whole long list of things that were utterly ridiculous, and it is the visibility of that absurdity
Yeah.
that might help us here in the long term.
Yes.
The more people who 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 develop a healthy distrust of public authorities because of this experience, the better.
I like how you said that. Yeah.
They were given authority during this period they didn't deserve, and then they misused it. And so the my hope would be that enough people understand how badly this went, and how the fact of that authority was one of the main things that made it possible, that a greater proportion of the population will decide that it's not appropriate to hand over that kind of discretion to unelected officials. Now, whether or not that'll happen or not, or whether or not it will be effective in preventing it, who knows? But at least you've got a glimpse into one of the main flaws in the way we govern ourselves.
And absolutely, because one of the things that I found was, if you were one of the individuals who actually just asked the question, if you question a doctor, you were put into a camp of conspiracy. You're just nuts. Like, I remember just being so shocked at the lack of thought process, and rather just submitting to it. And would you say this is something that's maybe been building to over the years, or how did?
Oh, no question.
Yeah.
Listen, people have grown up
Yeah.
now with a ubiquitous managerial state.
Yeah.
And people believe, and understandably so, that the proper role of government
Yeah.
is to make policies about everything, and use its expertise to tell us all to behave. And you know that those things happened in spades, of course, during COVID. And you almost, it might be that we needed to come to this kind of a moment where everything became just too much for people to understand that this is not the inevitable way things have to be. But the degree of distrust that may be necessary now, and maybe justified,
Yeah.
isn't limited just to public health officials. I mean, you mentioned the medical profession.
For sure.
The medical profession as a profession was a great disappointment, or worse, in this period. Their governing bodies basically prohibited, in many provinces, prohibited their doctors from expressing their own medical opinions about the appropriateness or efficacy of the various government COVID
Yeah.
measures. And of course, there were exceptions in the roster of doctors, and some of those doctors stuck their neck out to tell us what they actually thought. But if you had a doctor who was blindly following orders from head office, essentially, pushing certain things, or the reverse, you got good reason to wonder about everything now that you get told, and whether or not it's in your best interest, or whether it's a directive from some other authority.
And now, I don't know if it's because of what happened with COVID, but during that era, you'd say, came Bill C-11, and I would imagine if I was a politician, you would phrase it as, we're protecting you from misinformation. You heard that all the time, but censorship in the name of safety seems to be what we're noticing here, where they're trying to govern the internet now.
I mean, this is a fairly new thing.
Yes.
And this term, misinformation, when people hear that term,
Yeah.
they should think censorship, because that's essentially what is being implied. I mean, here's the notion that you have free speech, but you should not be able to use your free speech to spread misinformation. That is, information that's not true. But let's just check that.
Yeah.
Your right to speak freely is not based upon you speaking the truth. Free speech does not depend upon truth,
Exactly. Free speech
right?
is free speech. Yeah.
That is not one of the criteria for speech. You are allowed to say things, whatever you believe, whether they turn out to be true or not. And we've sort of slid into this situation as a society where there's some kind of expectation for some reason that what we hear or see online or on TV or wherever we're watching, that should be the truth.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is not the way it works in a free country.
Yeah. That's
The,
interesting.
the, the job of filtering out what is true and what is false is up to the viewer, not to the speaker or the broadcaster or especially the government. So as soon as you get into an era where the government takes on as a mandate to filter out misinformation, the train has left the station.
Yeah.
That you're heading to a very bad place.
Yeah. And why would you say we're heading to a bad place?
Well, because this idea is being accepted. I mean, there's no huge backlash I mean, from some people for sure, but there's no massive backlash against the government's plans to supervise for misinformation online. The reaction within a free country I would have liked to think would be, what are you talking about? We are allowed to say whatever we want, and those people who hear us are allowed to judge for themselves whether what we've said is valid or not.
So when we say, like, obviously, growing up and anything to do with politics, we often say we're in a free country. But where's the line of that? When does a country not become free?
Yeah, damn good question. You know what? You end up wondering whether we've crossed that line already.
Yes, and that's obviously what I'm alluding to.
Right. Well, we have listen. We have a managerial state that is so ubiquitous now. It has its hands in everything. I mean, it's very difficult to run a business today without basically having to work in concert with the government in so many different ways. And so, when we wonder whether or not we live in a free country, if you define free country as a country in which you're essentially able to direct your own activities and own your own life and choose your own objectives and your own speech, then you can make a good case that we've left that place.
There is a place for all this. Like, for example, I'm a father of three.
Yep.
I want them to grow up in a society where they can be protected, that there is government ordinance that's there that you can call upon and they'll come to your rescue, those types of things. But I also want them to be safe from predators. I want those types of things. But so I guess it comes down to more of a cultural value system in the people. And just as we spoke before, we saw those values kind of show up when the pressure came onto the country. What would you say shapes values of a country that causes it to be the way that it is? Like, where do these values come from? How do you change them? Because they seem to direct everything we do.
Well, sure, yeah, and one of the realities that we've had to confront, I think, during this period is that law itself is a product of culture,
Yes,
product of values, right? And so people think, well, we have the charter, it's written down in black and white. We have these statutes, they're pretty solid. So all this crazy stuff that's happening, we'll turn to the law will put it right. But that's not the way it's worked out. And that's partly because the law itself is a cultural product. And when the culture shifts, the law changes with it, even when it doesn't appear, the words of the statute might not change, but the way it's understood, the way it's applied, shifts with the tide of how the culture is going. So the law has not been the rock that people assumed that it would be. How you change a culture's values is a very difficult question. But we are in a situation now where they have changed or appear to have changed over a period of time. And some of us didn't notice that they were changing. And it's now we've come to a place where it's a fait accompli. It's all done. I mean, one could make the case that this cultural revolution is basically finished.
Yeah.
And we've ended up in a place where the values that we thought were encompassed in the law actually might not be the case anymore.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on what's happening right now with Jordan Peterson.
Right.
right now, for the viewers that don't know, and if you want to give context to them on what you're aware of in that, is I believe a series of tweets that he put out. His license is being threatened as a doctor for his opinions he shared. As a law professor, what are your thoughts on that? And what's the precedence that this sets, I guess?
Well, Jordan is not the only one that this is happening to, but he's the most prominent person that's happening to, and it's basically a witch hunt. That's the way I would describe it.
Yeah.
The complaints that have given rise to this have not come from his patients. They've come from sort of aggrieved ideologues that don't like the kinds of things that he says on social media.
And I found out that anyone can complain, actually, I found.
Yes.
Which is also wild, which means anyone who just doesn't like him can go right ahead.
And I don't believe there's ever even been a disciplinary hearing yet, although it may go to one. But at the moment, they've demanded that he undergo retraining on how to use social media, which is, I mean, it's no laughing matter, but it is also a joke. I mean, just imagine Jordan Peterson, somebody trying to retrain Jordan Peterson on how to use social media.
I hope they record it if they do.
I would love to be there in the room, but he's not going to do that. Jordan Peterson has a spine, and that is all to our great benefit.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a great burden on him, and very and unfair. They're basically trying to supervise his political expression.
Yeah.
So that the silver lining might be that they have, number one, they've chosen Jordan as a target.
Yeah.
Because Jordan's not going to back down.
Yeah, he's going to fight. Yeah.
And it will pull back the curtain on how the professional colleges are operating now. But mind you, we have other examples as well of colleges sort of redefining the nature of professional conduct. I mean that so these professional colleges for psychologists and doctors and nurses and lawyers and so on, have had the mandate essentially in the past to ensure competence in the public interest. I mean, your dentist should know how to drill teeth, but they've been expanding the idea of competence essentially to impose ideological requirements. And if you do not comport with those requirements, they'll go after you. They'll discipline you or threaten to take away your license. There's a nurse in BC. I mean, there are lots of these cases, but there's a nurse in BC, Amy Ham, who is being threatened by her college because she had the temerity to believe in two genders, and they're calling that unprofessional conduct. So we are now in the era where the power of the state regulators is being applied to achieve an ideological position.
Yeah.
And those professionals that don't agree with that position are now in danger of having their speech censored and so on.
The idea of that, and I think that's what you're alluding to with Jordan kind of putting up a fight here, is what the people or government will hopefully arrive at will be what the democracy is wanting, what the democracy is hoping to achieve.
Well, you'd like to think that.
Yeah.
And I certainly hope that, but democracy is sometimes now a justification. The fact that we have, well, maybe, and some people dispute that we have a democracy in the real sense, but we at least have elections.
Yes.
And the fact that we have elections for some people is enough to justify the operations of various kinds of state agencies that are not themselves democratic. The mere fact that we have elections doesn't protect you from the tyranny of the public institution.
You're right. The election is essentially just bringing the people to vote. But once they're voted in, there seems to be very little that a vote that I can do as a citizen to even get any influence on anything besides try to make a petition and try to get the voices rallied. But other than that, there's not much you can do. And so once they're elected, they do what they want. Like if you could design a government, what would you take away and what would you make mandatory?
Oh, well, okay. So I think the best way to imagine that, to do this sort of thought experiment, is instead of trying to imagine what you take away, start with nothing.
Yeah.
And then decide what it is that's essential.
Yeah.
Because I like that. The best way to look at laws, I think, is this way. at the end of every law is the violence of the state. I mean, it's not apparent, but even a parking ticket, eventually, if things go really badly and you refuse and refuse and refuse, and you get into contempt of court situations, I mean, you can be arrested for contempt of court if you refuse at the end of the day. So every single law, in the end, must be enforced with the violence of the state. Okay, so the question for each and every law that you have is this important enough that we want to impose violence on our citizens? Right? And the answer, for my money, is, for a lot of laws that we have in place, the answer is no.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them should go. And if we limited our government, at least to start, with this sort of single mandate, which is, look, your job is to make sure there's no violence. People are not imposing themselves, coercing other people. Then your first and your most important job is done. And otherwise, we can deal with chaos, peaceful chaos in a society where people disagree and say different things and behave different ways and belong to different groups. Totally fine, as long as it's peaceful.
Yeah, and it's interesting they use the word
But the way
peaceful.
our government thinks about it is, well, we have to have order.
Yes.
Everybody has to be doing this together in the same way. That's not a free country.
Yeah, because in the trucker convoy that went to Ottawa, that's the language of the truckers all through and through was peaceful protest. I was actually there on the streets reporting. I was there for 2.5 weeks through the whole thing. And
Right.
But every time I'd go back to my hotel room and turn on some of the mainstream media,
Yep.
I would see that it was violent and that windows were being broken and this is bad and that they're. And so I was like, we were perplexed. But it was actually, to be honest, it was unnerving and kind of scary because
Sure.
I'm there watching one thing, and then I go home and turn on the TV, which 99.9% of the country's watching, and they're seeing a whole different story. And so,
I totally identify with that experience. I was there as well.
Yeah.
And you could see the propaganda unrolling right in front of your eyes.
yeah, and it was wild. I just really started to realize how important it is for us to get involved in stuff like C11, because if they can censor what they deem to be censorable,
Right.
people just won't get the real truth. And so when we were there and watching it happen right in front of our eyes, I was just realizing,
See,
wow.
these two things you've mentioned have to be put together.
Yes,
Right. So
yes.
on the one, this experience at the convoy with the version of events that were being portrayed on mainstream TV,
Yeah.
with the proposition that the government
Yeah.
wants to be the one to supervise misinformation.
Yes.
You put those two things together,
Yes.
the result you get is the only thing that's going to be allowed is the propaganda being put out by the mainstream news.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to end up with.
Yeah. I remember seeing the police. I don't know how long you were there for, but I was in my hotel room watching the police lines form. And I just I remember having this kind of like, it felt like out of body experience going like, is
Yes.
this real?
Yes.
Like,
Right.
I cannot believe this. It was just, it was so surreal.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Surreal is a good word for the experience, and
Yes.
it changed so fast.
Yes.
From while the thing was ongoing before the police came in.
Yeah.
It was, as you say, it was. I mean, I found it almost like joyful.
It really was. Yeah.
Right. They were angry about the policies, but they were actually so happy to be there.
Yeah.
And it was quite a thing to behold.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you had the invocation of the act, and the police showed up, and things turned really dark really fast.
Very, very
And
fast.
it was hard to watch.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah.
The way it was described in government terms was far from the reality. Let's put it this way in legal terms. So let's ask this question: what happened
Yeah.
during the convoy that was actually illegal? And one can think of two things.
Yeah.
The first was the honking during the day.
Yeah.
And the second thing was the parking.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point along the way, an injunction application was brought to court, and a court issued an injunction against the honking, and the honking stopped.
Yeah.
And so all you were left with was parking.
Yeah.
And so let's put it in these terms. We had a federal government invoke the Emergencies Act to deal with a national emergency
For parking.
that claimed to use or threaten the use of serious violence
Yeah.
on the basis
Yeah.
that somebody was parking illegally.
Yeah.
The supporters that showed up to walk along Wellington Street
Yeah.
had done exactly nothing
Yeah.
that was illegal.
Yeah.
And so the whole justification for the invocation of the act and the appearance of the police and the freezing of the bank accounts was on the basis of infraction of parking bylaws and maybe the Highway Traffic Act.
When you put it that way, it's absolutely wild. And I think, as we were saying before, I feel like we could go in 100 different angles down. Without doing 5 more shows, what would you point people or Canadians to? What books maybe to read or what resources to get their hands on in walking down this road to try to become an informed Canadian citizen on policy, law, or just culture?
Right. Okay. Well, good question. So, I mean, I shouldn't miss the opportunity to plug our own website first. We're at rightsprobe.org.
Okay.
So, our work is contained there. Please have a look. Writing and videos and so on. And there are a lot of other independent sources of media that are doing really good work, including your own. I'm really glad you're there at the convoy.
Thank you.
So to all those people who are looking for reliable news sources, go online, go to the independents.
Yeah.
If you're spending all your time watching CBC,
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to end up thinking.
Yeah.
But don't assume that they are giving you the straight goods.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just a wise sense of approach in thinking, so that you can just realize, okay, just multiple angles on the same topic. So, Bruce, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's just been such a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you taking the time, but also sharing your expertise. So I want to say thank you.
Listen, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You are an essential part of this series. Support truth, knowledge, and wisdom by sharing this show with a friend. Visit returntoreason.tv. There, you can subscribe to our newsletter by clicking Become an Insider. Get the latest articles, episodes, and exclusive content. It's Return to Reason.